Howdy everybody, I pray this video finds you blessed. So this week I'm using another piece of walnut that John sent me a while back to make a vase. I'm also going to use some silicone ice cube trays that I got from Walmart. They were in their clearance section, so I grabbed 2 of them. And I made several different cubes, different colors and things like that, and the purple ones are the ones that I really liked and settled on. One of the frequent questions that I'm asked is, which total boat resin is best to use? Well, it all depends on what kind of projects you're doing and whether you have a pressure pot. If you have a pressure pot or you plan to use a pressure pot with your resin, the 2-to-1 slow set is the best resin to use with a pressure pot. You can also use the 2-to-1 slow set for your finishes if you like to do finishing. And if you pour a real small amount of it and keep an eye on the bubbles, you can use it without a pressure pot, but I wouldn't recommend it for deeper casts, especially things like this ice cube tray. And if you don't have a pressure pot and you don't plan on buying a pressure pot, but you want a resin that you can use for smaller projects, smaller pours, the 3-to-1 thick set. The name is kind of funny because it's actually thinner because it is 3-to-1. It slowly cures, so it gives time for those air bubbles to release. But that's only if you do a smaller pour. Take your time, don't pour more than 1 inch at a time, don't mix a ton in one container at once. Again, resin, the more you mix together, the A and B, especially in one container, the quicker the exothermic reaction is going to happen because it heats up and it cures. The heat is what causes it to cure. The silicone mold is made for ice and not resin, so it's a little on the thinner side, and once that resin heats up, it causes the mold to kind of distort a little bit and it moves a little easier. It could have been how I had laid it into the pressure pot too, but it made the squares not perfectly square, which is fine because what I was going to do with them, it didn't matter. But keep that in mind if you need them to be a perfect square and not have any distortion to them, that you might want to get a little thicker, more durable 4-resin silicone mold. Off camera, I cut the corner off of the walnut piece so that a way I could drill the holes in it and it not be, too hard for me to fill them and then pour the resin, obviously. I kind of got a little ahead of myself and forgot to record that process. I was kind of just working away on this and I realized, oh my gosh, these holes are going to be a lot larger than my squares, and then obviously how I'm chiseling them out, it's going to take a major effect on the final look. It's just one of those things where till you get to that part in the project, you start realizing like how bad you are at a particular thing. Chiseling definitely isn't my strong suit. I probably use my chisels more for things that they're not designed to do than actually chiseling. So anyways, that's, it is how it is. And, they're in there. At this point, I'm just like, all right, we're just going to do it and see what happens. It's not perfect. It's not what I thought it would be, but we're going to go for it anyway. So I used 9 cubes on the other side, so I decided to kind of do the same amount on the other half. So adding these walnut pieces I thought would kind of be cool, because it brings the walnut from the other side on to the front side where all the clear resin is going to be, and kind of give it a floating effect, I guess. If you ever see me using clear plastic for my resin molds, this is what I'm using. It is chopping mats that I get from the Dollar Tree. It's only $1 for a pack of 2, and they are so useful. And you can reuse them as long as you don't tear them up too badly, tearing apart your mold. I would have used less resin if I had taken some of these cubes over to the sander and sanded the corners down on them, but I had already glued them onto the piece when I realized that they kind of stick out a little bit, but I had just enough of the plastic to make the mold, so it wasn't a big deal. I just kind of look back and go, well, next time if I do this again, I'm going to sand those back and make the mold a little bit smaller so I don't have to use as much resin. So here I already did my first pour, and it didn't have any air bubbles. Like, okay, I poured about 2 inches worth, and it looks just fine. Of course, a lot of the tape is covering the ugly anyway, down at the bottom where there's air bubbles. So I was like, I'll just mix that same amount again, and it'll be fine. Well, it wasn't fine. I had air bubbles. This vase is a little over 9 inches tall. Well, finished 9 inches tall, so it was a little over 9 inches before it was finished. So I should have done 9 pours, and I only did 7. So just to give you an idea of kind of how much more resin I poured at once than what I should have. But if I had a pressure pot that this would fit into at the time, it would have been just fine. And you can still use the thick set in the pressure pot. It takes a little bit longer to cure, but you can pour more if you're using a pressure pot. You don't have to stay to that inch. Off camera, I took this over to my bandsaw and just cut some of those spots that were really sticking out off, so it would be a little quicker for me to round it out. It still took a little bit to round this out because I couldn't go very fast. It was very unbalanced, and so it took long enough as it was. I can only imagine if I hadn't cut those chunks off. If you try using a gouge to cut resin and you're getting the shatters, I still get shatters, especially when the resin or the piece I'm working on is really out of balance and I'm trying to round it out. That's why a lot of times I just mow through it and let it shatter until I start getting down to its size that I want it, or obviously close to round, because then once I get it close to round, I can pick up the speed of the lathe, which also helps when cutting resin. And I can, go a little bit slower and get that the shavings from the resin versus those shattered pieces. And it's hard to tell you how to do that with a gouge because it's a feel. I would just say try different things until you get those shavings. And once you get those shavings, look at where your gouge, what part of the gouge is doing the cutting, how you're holding it, how fast you're going, how slow you're going, how much pressure. You really want the gouge to do the work, and you do kind of have to put some pressure on it depending on what project and what wood it's mixed with and yada yada. So all those variables have a lot to do with how you're going to cut. And you kind of just, once you start getting those shavings, you get a feel for it, and then you kind of just go from there, and then every piece is just, it starts getting easier and easier. So don't give up. You can do it, but in the meantime, negative rake tools work beautifully. And I don't have any regular straight scrapers, but I was told that if you tip the nose down a little bit of your straight scrapers, it kind of does that negative rake effect, and you can cut the resin without it shattering. So I haven't tried that because I don't have any regular. All of my scrapers are negative rake, but negative rake or negative rake carbide works great too. I set my caliper somewhere around under 3 inches and just took my parting tool and kind of got the top and the bottom to about that size. It just gave me a visual reference on how to shape, because I like to connect A and B together, and as long as I know what size I'm shooting for at each end, it kind of helps me visualize my shape. I already kind of have an idea of what shape I'm going for, but if I decide to change my mind through the middle of it, at least I have a point of reference either way. And then, of course, my center line, so I know, um, you know, where I'm at in the piece and how to shape it. Sometimes those lines and things like that just help to visually put things in shapes and curves where it will be pleasing to the eye. These air bubbles from casting coming back to haunt me. So I'm just taking some medium set resin and putting it into the holes, using a toothpick to kind of get the air out and get the resin worked down in there. Just taped it up and then let it sit overnight. The reason why the piece is glossy now, because I took the leftover resin and just painted over the whole thing in case I missed any kind of air pocket holes, and I wanted to just coat it all down and hopefully not have to fill anymore. After I got the rim the size I wanted, I went ahead and put tape around it. Whether that really helps out or not, I don't know. Just in my mind, I was wanting to keep, since it's vibrating the most at the very, very end, I wanted to keep that rim good and secured. I don't know if that really makes any sense, but it did at the time. I don't have a set of calipers that will go all the way down to the very bottom that are long enough so I can see how thin I'm going. But because of the fact that one side of it is translucent, I can peek in and see exactly how thin I'm actually going and making sure that it's consistent all the way down, which is convenient on this piece. But I can see how that laser attachment would be useful, because when you can't see, where you're going, it definitely helps give you an idea of where you're at in the piece, and also how thin. Medium set resin to do my finishes, and it seems like to be the perfect in between. It doesn't take too long, but it does allow some of the air to release. I actually have less little bubbles with the medium set than I do the fast or the slow. Of course, the slow will always be perfect, so if you just want to purchase one resin, the slow set is just fine for doing coatings. You just have to leave the lathe running a little bit longer. In the summertime here, I need something that's going to be curing a little faster because of bugs. They just like to, join my piece. Bob Cook makes my acrylic maker coins. I forgot to actually put his card up, but that's who makes my maker coins. I'll put the link to him in the description below so you can contact him on making your own maker coins. Hey, finally got this done after several weeks. couple weeks of my lathe being down, which it was just the relay, and plugged it in last week and it works and no problems during this turning. So I'm very thankful for that. So this project idea came from my brass vase, my failed brass vase. This is kind of the shape I was going for with my brass vase project, but because it was just too heavy with all that metal on one side, it didn't work out. So I thought of kind of going with that same idea, but using these resin squares that I made. I got the mold from Walmart for $1. It's an silicone ice cube. Ugh. It's a silicone ice cube tray. It was on clearance for $1, I think, and I grabbed 2 of them. I figured incorporating some of the walnut into the floating squares would be cool too. Kind of makes it look like it's digitally disappearing or reappearing or whatever. Anyways, it did turn out the way I imagined it, other than some kind of mistakes made along the way, or just, you know, lack of chisel experience. First of all, I'm going to point out that my chiseling skills are lacking. Yeah, well, you know, you don't know that until you do it, and then when you do it, then you realize. First of all, I drilled the holes too big. I was afraid that I wasn't going to get the hole big enough, and I didn't want to have to go back and drill again, so therefore I drilled it too big, and then realized why that wasn't going to work out. And some of the resin did leak. There was cracks and things like that in the wood that the resin filled, so you see some evidence of resin bleeding in there. You know, they're not perfect, but it gave me practice on chiseling and knowing what to do and what not to do for next time. And then the resin I poured more than an inch at a time. I used the thickset 3-to-1. That is the best resin of Total Boats to use when you don't have a pressure pot. And it's because it's thinner and it allows the resin to slowly cure and allows the bubbles to come out of the resin. But if you do put more than an inch on your project and it does get too hot, it starts to cure faster. The more resin you pour, the faster it will cure because the exothermic reaction. So that's kind of what happened, and some bubbles formed on top of my squares. All of them have some sort of air bubbles on them, around them, and around the edges here. I just chalk it up as a lesson learned and do it differently next time if I want to do something like this. But hopefully this gave you guys some ideas, and my mistakes will help prevent y'all from making some. You'll just have to make your own mistakes, not mine. And yeah, so I'm very happy with how it turned out. I turned it super thin. One, because you'll be able to see how thin it is with these cubes in here, and it's a vase, you know, and fill it with water. It's completely waterproof because of the resin coating that is on it. It's a boat resin, so it's going to be waterproof. And yeah, so I like it. I like how it turned out. Obviously there's things about it I don't like, the mistakes I made, but I look at it and it reminds me of where I could go with this style and design, as long as I do a better job on certain aspects. And of course, you know, that's what it's all about, doing and learning. I did get a new pressure pot. Doug had mentioned that I got one in his last Thursday video. It's the same pressure pot that he got. It's a TCP. I'll talk more about it once I use it in a project, so that way you'll see how it all works. So we'll introduce you to the new pressure pot. Fortunately, I didn't get it in time for this project. And of course, you can avoid air bubbles in your project too when using the 3-to-1, as long as you follow directions and you don't pour more than an inch, and you stop trying to be quick, fast, in a hurry. High-speed chicken feed. I hope y'all like it. Sorry, my paw prints are all over it, so it kind of looks more smudgier than what it is. It's humid out here, so my paw prints are all over it. I'll give you a little bit more of a movement, closer look. I really love how you can see through some of these. And on this side, you can see through some of them. It's a good idea, but just needs to be executed with a little bit more patience and thoughtfulness through some of the mistakes that I made. So we'll probably do another one of these again, just not right now. I'm over it right now. I pray y'all have a wonderful weekend. Take care and God bless.